Welcome to episode 201 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com. And this season, if you listen to the last episode of last season, I have some exciting news. I've brought on a co-host.
That's me. I'm Jill Nowacki, founder and CEO of Humanidei.
This episode of the show is sponsored by Trellance. Trellance is a leading technology partner for credit unions, delivering innovative technology solutions to help credit unions achieve more. With a comprehensive suite of analytics, cloud, and talent solutions, the Trellance team ensures credit unions increase efficiency, manage risk, and improve member experience. We appreciate their support. This season, Jill and I will have conversations around leadership, credit unions, living our best lives. We will have some of the most respected leaders from around the credit union community who we are so grateful to call friends join us in the discussion from time to time too. So a little change from the first 200 episodes as we kick off this new season. Have to keep it fresh, and I think you all will find these changes entertaining. So many of the conversations over the past few years in those first 200 episodes, the conversations, the questions, they came from around our island in our kitchen. So why not make it more personal? Keep the microphones close by and record a couple of times a month. I really think this should be a fun season. One last thing I'll add before we jump into today's conversation is make sure to stick around to the end of each show. We'll leave you with a couple actionable ideas that you can take back to leading your credit unions. And with that, now I'll turn it over to my co-host, my love, and Jill can tee up the topic for today. Jill, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Randy. I'm excited for this. And I'm excited for this topic. It's a fun one that we kicked off sort of last week as we were looking at the end of the year. And it's one of those curiosity questions that I so often surprise you with out of the blue. And I guess I would summarize the question as this. Is life short or is life long? It's a question I've pondered quite a bit since watching the movie Garden State about 20 years ago. And in that movie, there's a conversation between characters played by Natalie Portman and Zach Braff, where essentially one says to the other that, hey, life is long and you just never know what may happen in the future. There's a lot of possibility there. And I think that may have been the first time in my life where I heard this life described as long instead of that more common way of thinking that's like, life is short. You better do it while you can because it goes by so fast. And, especially at the end of the year, we hear people talking about that life is short thinking. Oh my gosh, can you believe it's December already? Where did 2024 go?
Time seems to go by faster as we get older. That's
there's a percentage of life reality on that one too, right? So for years, I've considered that question off and on. Is life short or is life long? And I guess that's where I'd like to start today. Randy, what do you think? Is life short or is life long?
First of all, I probably should have rewatched Garden State, but a little into me. I didn't want to spend the $3.99 to rent it because I kept falling asleep. We'll get to it someday because I do remember being that a good movie. This was such an interesting question when you posed it to me because I never really considered myself a life is short or a life is long person. And over the days of thinking about it, I almost feel like I'm both. Because in some ways, I gave you the example of like when I travel, I like to travel slower and I don't try to fit everything in where like I tell myself I can always go back. So that implies that there's some longevity left in this life. But then so much of my life, if I want to do it, I want to do it now. And I'm very grateful for the day and not guaranteed tomorrow. And I am somebody who likes to be in the present. So even after thinking about this for the better part of a week, I'm not sure I can come up with I'm a life is short or life is long here either way. So let me ask you the same question. Is life short or life long?
Yes.
Yes.
And I think what makes the question so interesting to me isn't necessarily that there's a right answer that life is short or life is long. But I think what makes it so interesting to me is how does that mindset affect the way you show up on the day to day? So if you're someone who believes life is short, how is that going to shape the decisions you make? Versus if you're someone who believes that life is long, how will that shape the decisions you make? And I think also there's this sort of like, do the decisions you've made shape your outlook on that? So if you've stayed in the same organization, the same career for 40 years, does that feel different than if you've done like a major life shift every 5 years and you're saying, gosh, I've had 8 different lives in this lifetime, for example, on that side of it?
One thing I was thinking about as we've been having this conversation was from the aspect of I am a firm believer in trying. and there's not this sense of permanence if it doesn't work. It doesn't have to be completed it's kind of that Silicon Valley. It doesn't have to be perfect to launch. To me, it's even more than that. And I can even think of something that with CUInsight over the past year, we've been having these ideas of more like training focused, not like a traditional webinar where it is like training focused programs. And I have a big vision for what this could look like, and have even went down the rabbit hole of what it would cost to build the entire platform out. And it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. But having that big vision didn't mean that there wasn't a step that we could take. And over the summer, we did just a small 3-workshop series to see if there was a desire, if the people of credit unions would want it. And it was very successful, just these 3 little workshops. And hundreds of people signed up for it. And it was like, okay, so now what's the next step? That took 0 investment to take that one step. And as we're doing our strategic planning, and as I'm talking to Greg, our new CEO right now, we're talking about this year. And it's like, okay, what's step 2? And that's going to be, I think we've settled on 3 or 4 series where there'll be 4 each that will be coming out this year, or 3 each, I think, and then a recap or something. So that's coming out this year with the whole goal that the year after it may be 12. Now, if that doesn't work, if this year we find out it's a horrible idea, nobody wants it, and just was a crazy idea in my mind, cool. Then we try something different. But it was still taking that first step and not waiting and not thinking that we have a strategic plan this out all the way. So sometimes I worry when I talk to people that whether it is like, well, we have to put that into our strategic plan before we try anything, or we have to have it perfect before we put it out to the membership instead of beta testing it to a select few members. So can we try this? Is there before making the huge investment to see if there's a better probability of working? So that was something that's been on my mind the last few days as we've been talking about this.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. You're talking about a specific project or a specific initiative to it, but I think to apply it more broadly to just strategic business planning as a whole. And, it's interesting because I think in the last 5 years, especially, businesses have recognized that you might write yourself a 5-year strategic plan, but the global pandemic comes along, or if the entire shape of work changes on that, you have to be ready to make more short-term moves. And I have one client I work with, and their regulator told them they needed a 10-year strategic plan. Yeah. So that's a life is long thinker, right? Yeah. On that one where it's like, you just can't plan for 10 years in that. But if you are thinking from that longer term outlook, how does it shape the decisions are made? Is that more likely to put you into a place where you are looking at it and saying, okay, it has to be this multi-$100,000 project if we're looking at it for 10 years, instead of if you're saying, hey, life is short, let's just see what we can do now. Like, let's keep our eyes on this shorter horizon. You do take those more incremental steps that perhaps lead to something that 10 years from now is wildly large and successful and has grown from that side of it.
There was it's a book that you used to hear me mention a lot more, but that one that a lot of it is outdated at this point. But years ago when I read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, he has a part of, it's kind of that analyzing pitfalls is something that comes up in your Harrison assessments that you do and with a lot of the work with credit unions. But that idea of being able to take a look and say, what's our loss here? Mm-hmm. Like if it doesn't work. And once you accept what that loss is, then can you take that step forward and decide what to do with that? And to me, that is how this all comes back to the life is short, life is long is I think when it comes to credit unions and to business in general, if you wait too long, somebody else is going to do it. And I remember a few years back when credit unions were like, we now have online bill pay or remote. And it was like, no, that's table stakes right now. That's like, that shouldn't even be worth an Instagram post or whatever at this point, because your members probably assumed you already had it.
No one noticed you didn't have it before.
You didn't have it, right? But that to me is like, what steps can you take? I remember conversations on the past podcast with like Alinda Bodie, who smaller credit union, who we know and love, but she would find ways to take steps to innovate and try new things. And that to me is in a sense, life is short, or maybe it's life is long and you have to be prepared for it. So anyways, that was something else that came up. I'd like to talk, and we can always tie this back to credit unions, but from a human standpoint too. And, most of the listeners of the podcast are leaders in our movement. And often you get to talk to people much more than I do when it comes to careers and stuff like that. Most people just ask me about travel or what you're up to. So, but anyways, so often I think you and I both hear it, whether it's personally from friends in the movement or you're hearing it on professional level as you're coaching people through their careers and trying to find new gigs, is there's that I would like to do, but someday when and it could be something in the credit union. It could be something they're doing outside. It could be when the kids get older. It could be, but there's always that but. And that's something that it just makes my skin crawl, right? Because it's like, if you're not happy in the situation, maybe this is my life is short, where it's like, change it, because we're not guaranteed tomorrow. You do this for a living. I just get to talk to people on the podcasts and stuff. But when you see that in careers, when you see the discontent in careers, and on the flip side of it, when you see the success that others are having, where they start to realize that maybe this isn't the right place for me to get to where I want to go, so I have to make a jump. How does that, I guess, fall into this topic of conversation as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And as I talk through this, I'll probably be able to categorize that as sort of what I would think that is. But, I've had conversations with people who have said things to me like, well, I can't apply for this next job. I can't pursue this big promotion because that promotion is going to expect this level of dedication from me, travel hours from me. And I don't know if as a mom, I would want to make that investment. And these are people who maybe they have a serious significant other, but they don't have babies yet. And they're talking about planning their future career steps based on how will that feel. And there's kind of this like, well, if babies are 5 years down the road for you, maybe go ahead and do this now. Do it for 5 years and see how you feel when the babies actually come. But that's kind of that. Maybe I would say that's a little bit of this, life is short and you only have one shot at living the life you want to live. And so you've got to know right now, what does the whole thing look like and how do you map it out? And you're making decisions based on what might happen at some point in the future versus other people who I talk to where they may be more inclined to perhaps on the other end of that spectrum, they're making moves and it's like, well, I know that 3 years from now, I'm going to go do X, Y, Z, but I'm going to go ahead and do this now anyway. And it's like, okay, well, you might want to watch the resume movement just a little bit here from that side of it too. But you do hear people who, I guess in that case, I don't know whether it's tied to is life long or is life short, but you see people put dreams or plans or ambitions on hold for some unknown. So, I always wanted to go get my PhD, but now I'm too old for it to matter. Well, again, not really tied to the life is short or life is long question, but there's this proverb about the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The second best time is right now. And I think that's what I see sometimes with people who are like, well, I missed that. I missed that opportunity already. And perhaps that is a life is short thinking because you're like, well, there's just not that much runway left. So it's too late now for me to do something. When it's like, gosh, if you're 45, you might be only halfway to the finish line here. Like you've got a chance to double what you've done over the last 45 years for another 45 years. Maybe it's not too late to get that PhD or pursue that CEO job or move to that place you've always thought about living too.
Absolutely. Two things that popped into my mind while you were talking there. And one was this kind of might tilt the conversation a little bit, but we brought up that we were going to have this conversation a couple of days ago with friends on New Year's Eve. And it kind of went down a rabbit hole towards like, do you believe in luck or being fortunate or are you grateful? Like that type of stuff. We must have all been reflecting after a couple of champagnes, waiting for fireworks to go off. But it had me thinking about that idea of when you said sometimes they feel like they missed an opportunity or people feel like it's like something has passed them by. One of the ways that the conversation tilted when we were having that with friends was that idea of like being prepared. So when the opportunity arises, you're ready to take that opportunity. So just because one opportunity passed you by doesn't mean another one did. That could be kind of a life is long. Like there will be other opportunities, but making sure that you are prepared for, what you want to do or what you want to become. The other thing that was just going nuts in my head was this idea that I turned 50 last year. My 40s were completely different than my 30s that were completely different than my 20s. From an adult life standpoint, they just looked significantly different. So to think that my 50s will look exactly like my 40s, to me, that just doesn't resonate, or that my 60s, may look exactly like my 40s or my 50s. So to wait for things, that's one of those things that doesn't resonate with me. There is this part where being intentional, we kind of create our destiny and future. It may not always go with how planned. It never tends to, right? Over the long term, I think we're like, ooh, who would have thought we were here today? This is amazing. And you and I've talked about it a lot, about how we've come to credit unions over many years ago, no, decades ago, right? But it wasn't something that was planned, but yet here it was. And then the opportunities that have come from that, the people we have met that have come from that, when you look back, it seems like a nice long career. In the moment, there was a lot of short things that were happening. So 2 little side bubble rants there, but
yeah. I think the other element to kind of you talking about where your 60s are going to look different than your 40s, I think another...
I still have to do my 50s, by the way.
But I think what many people do is they wait for something that is a benchmark change. So things will look different when I retire. Things will look different when I get married. Things will look different after I get that next degree, versus this idea of what you're kind of talking about is, and what I think we were talking about with our friends too, was this more of you might put a plan out there. You might say, well, I want life to look like this, but then be ready to step up when different opportunity comes up when it did. And I am very much here's my 5-year plan. Here's what I want things to look like. Here are my goals. And when you and I kind of first started this particular conversation, that's been our 7-year relationship, that at the time I said, well, when Crosby graduates from high school, then I'm going to move into a consulting role. And it was absolutely my intention to stay in the job that I was currently working in until that happened. And then opportunities came up in certain ways, and I was able to move into starting Humanidei, like that intersection between opportunity and passion, I guess, that came up. And I could have very much said, oh no, life is long and there'll be time for that later. But it was right to step into that different role at that time and build it. And I think that's part of is it luck? It's like a willingness to be ready to say yes to an opportunity, even if it doesn't match exactly the planned timeline that's expected. Taking that back to the business side again, I think we see that you see businesses do that too. You start out a year with a certain business plan or a certain strategic plan or a certain trajectory, and then something comes up, whether it's, an opportunity for a merger or to make an investment in some unknown opportunity, or even to hire talent that wasn't available before. And you see those businesses that can be a bit agile with those. Just like I think with the people who can be a bit agile in those, you see them seize unknown opportunities and thrive a lot more with that too.
Absolutely. What about for the people out there who struggle with change? Or the ones who like the straight? We both have friends and know plenty of people in our lives who even if they're complaining, that change is worse than the complaining, right? And I don't know where they would fall into this. I'll tell you, Jill's very active on LinkedIn. You should, I'd love to hear your opinions on this. She'll tell me if they're great and stuff, and maybe I'll even jump on there, but I'm not on the socials as much anymore.
We'll make sure we do a LinkedIn post after the release of the episode and survey folks on this one. Yeah.
This life is long or life is short. So when I do think of people that we know, if the change part is the tough part, is it something that's like innate in some of us that we prefer a slower, steady path or something, and then others were just squirrel? We got to do something else, right? And do you think that aligns with the life is short or life is long?
Yeah. At face value, this might not feel like I'm responding to what you're asking about, but in my head, it connects to it. So a couple of years ago, we were at Acoska's SACA Congress in Africa, and Kim Spanum, the CEO at Summit Credit Union in Wisconsin, was sharing specifically the work they do to deliver financial services with a target audience of focused on women's financial well-being. And she shared something at that time that stuck with me and evidently resonated with the audience, because this international audience was just like, oh yeah. And it was when Kim said, views that women have versus men have about money are very different, where men want to make money grow and women want to make money last. And you think about it from that standpoint. And so from that, if you are somebody who's trying to make money last, you're curious about where is the finish line and how do I just make sure that I can make it to the finish line. If you're more of that male mentality, you're curious about where the finish line is. You're curious about like how to keep making things as robust as possible over this time. So I look at that and I think, is there some sort of outlook or mentality that does make you say, I need certainty, I need steadiness, I need to know what to expect so I can plan for that and move that along? And is that a place where change, the unexpected, the unknown comes into that? And it's like, ooh, but I had plans to live in this house for 30 years and get this mortgage paid off. So this opportunity to move into my dream house or move across the country for my dream job, that creates this level of disruption that makes it difficult for me to plan for steadiness. And so is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think if you're somebody who thrives on change, thrives on being able to seize the opportunity and go with that, would look at somebody like that and say, oh, well, you're going to miss out on so much if you need this like clear path to the finish line. On the other hand, somebody who loves that stability and uncertainty and clarity of it is going to look at that and say, how are you ever going to get to the place where you have confidence about where you are, the cushion, the support, the comfort that you really need for that? And I mean, it's no surprise to you. It's probably no surprise to anybody who knows me that I am very much what's the next fun opportunity? Let's definitely jump into that. I think you tend to be that way too, maybe with a slightly different outlook on that. And so you and me having this conversation probably presents a bit of a bias. It'd be another thing. I'd be really curious for those people who are like, no, I've been in the same career for 40 years. I've been in the same house for 40 years. And now what I've built, this concrete foundation I have, is letting me live with so much peace of mind, maybe, that when they look at someone else and they're like, where's the peace of mind in seizing these opportunities, right? I mean, what do you think? Because again, I know we're having a biased conversation here because where we think is much more likely to be in that. See what's new, see what happens, take a risk.
Yeah, I think you're an interesting blend of it because you are a planner by nature. I think you plan more than me. We did a personal strategic planning over the summer, so that was something. Which now multiple couples have asked about that. So
I do have the template.
Right, she has a template if anybody wants it. I said yes to doing it, and it was actually a lot of fun. We had a good time. There was even an activity plan. So, I mean, I agree with you completely that I think we are biased in that sense that we like change and we like new things and we like trying new stuff. And I think like testing ourselves and that type of thing. So it would be interesting to get feedback from others who do prefer more consistency. My guess is that's how they would look at our mindset is like, wow, there's just no consistency there. Where's the foundation? And that's interesting. I also, when I was thinking of it, it's so funny because I so often think of like previous guests on this podcast. And I was thinking of conversations that I know you've had, but like that I've also had with Leo Ordine. He's been on the show a couple of times. I love the guy. And him and I think, tend to align a lot on that idea. We struggle with it, but trying to stay more present. And that really does take a much shorter term outlook. In my mind, it does. It goes to that idea that that's why they call the present the present. It's going to quote Kenny Chesney now. But it's that idea that what we can control, what we can do is right now and today. So what 5 years from now or 10 years from now looks like, we can take steps along the way, but there's nothing we can do today that makes 10 years happen exactly how we think, right? Like it just...
There's nothing possible. We can do today that makes tomorrow happen exactly how we think either.
Exactly. So, that to me is where it is. How do we start things today? How do we make today a little bit better? How do we take that first step today? And even when we are doing the planning, so if the NCUA asked you for 10 years, great, but what's the first year going to look like? What's the first month going to look like? What steps? How are we asking those questions of ourselves or our organizations that how does this fit into what we're trying to accomplish? And if it doesn't, do we have to change our plan? Or have we just chased a squirrel? So I don't know. I find it interesting. I would love to hear other people's thoughts and feedback on things like this. One kind of more question as we start to get towards the end. And like I said, we'll leave some takeaways. If people are listening today, what questions, number one, do you have of them, I guess, that are just okay, you and I have talked about it. We've brought some friends into the conversation. But to further this conversation, if let's just say maybe you were going to write a CUInsight community article on it or something, what points of this conversation would you love to hear from others? And number two, for anybody out there, it's the first of the year. We're literally recording this on January 2nd, so it'll be out here in about a week from now. Everybody's kicking it off. We all know about New Year's resolutions, things like that. Just spend a couple minutes. You know the career side of things probably better than anybody else out there. You do a lot of strategic planning with credit unions. How's everybody start off on that, taking that first step and making 2025 an awesome year? Putting her on the spot.
Yeah, with two very different, very big questions on it. So the first one, we're calling back to the beginning of what you said. So this question of like, what would I be curious about from others on their thinking? So I'd probably pose to them, start that conversation the same way I did with you, which is that when you think about your outlook, are you someone who believes that life is short or life is long? And how does thinking one way or another shape how you make decisions about how you spend time, how you spend money, how you allocate resources? So on a personal level or a professional level, if you're looking at a situation with that outlook, either life is really short or life is really long, how does it impact the decisions you make, the resources you allocate in moving forward with that? Thinking about that from my perspective, I guess what I would be really curious to dig into is what does it do to one's sense of urgency? What does it do to one's sense of peace of that? And what I would go back to always is how does that impact a person's ability to be present in the here and now? Does one way or another, thinking life is short or thinking life is long, change how able they are to show up in this exact moment? So that would be the curiosity I would want to explore in conversations with others on it. That question about 2025 and
New Year's resolutions or whatever,
I am a constantly goal-focused person. So regardless of when it is,
to put it out in the universe, what's your word of the year?
Yes.
Jill does a word every year. I do not, but Jill does. So what's your word of the year?
My word is peace. And I think that ties into this conversation we're having, this concept of is life short or is life long? I think this desire to have some peace about where life is, maybe what it comes down to is it doesn't really matter whether life is short or life is long and what my outlook on it is. What I'm striving for this year is to create a life where I have peace of mind that it is where I need to be and that I'm creating that life that provides that sense of peace of mind for me. I think I learned I won't say in 2024, over a lifetime, I think we've learned that you can plan for whatever you want to plan for, and things can happen that don't go the way you want them to. And those things do impact you. A global pandemic did impact how I planned to spend 2020. And so creating this situation where I have peace regardless of what might happen externally, that I'm doing what I need to do in the moment that I'm in with it. So that's the word of the year. How I would encourage others, and I think this kind of segues into my key takeaway maybe. So
let's move right there. Okay. You go first. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'll leave you with a couple nuggets, and we'd love to hear yours as well, but takeaways. So, all right, Jilly, you're up.
So after this conversation and the time we've spent reflecting on it, the key takeaway I would say, based on the question of is life short or is life long, is that it doesn't really matter what your outlook is, as long as your outlook helps you to be present in the current situation. And from that, I mean, able to make decisions that are being made with a present peace of mind and not with a fear of scarcity. So if you're afraid that life is too short and you don't have time to do everything you do, and so you're scrambling around trying to do everything, but not being fully present in the moment, that's a negative. But if you're also scared because you think life is too long and you're worried about the scarcity and not having enough resources at the end of life to get there, that also may cause you to put off something. So that idea of like, oh, well, I'm not going to travel until I retire, but then you miss out on a lot.
You might have bum knees or a bad hip.
And so that idea of regardless of what outlook you hold, I think it's important for people to give consideration to it and to ask themselves, how is the way I'm looking at this impacting the decisions I'm making for my present situation? And would I be making any different decisions if I looked at it differently? And again, that's certainly the case from a personal standpoint, but I think it matters from a business perspective too, because if you're missing opportunities because you're like, we can always do that next year, someone else might get there first, just as you talked about with the CUInsight workshop series that you've been working on.
Absolutely.
So what about you? What is your key takeaway on this question?
The thing that popped into my head when you were talking there was a few years ago at the Atlanta airport down by the plane train, between the terminals, there was a Southwest Airlines advertisement that said, buy the ticket. And then underneath it said, you won't regret it. And I loved it. Everybody took a picture of it because I'm like, that's true. We normally don't regret buying the ticket. So for me, it's funny. I had actually wrote something down beforehand and it's kind of holding true, but you kind of said a lot of it. So we seem to be thinking the same here. Same. So for me, I was going to say, it's like whether you fall on the life is short or the life is long camp, it really doesn't matter. It really all starts with the first step. Whether that's a first step in a 5K or first step in a marathon, to use the two. So that first action, my takeaway to everybody as we start this year is go start something. Take that first step today. There's no time like the present to do that, whether that's personally or if it's professionally or if it's for the credit union out there or the organization that you work for, is take that first step, put something into action. Let's get movement rolling and see how good it feels. And you never know where it'll end, long term or short term. So, and don't be afraid to fail, because that's the thing. If you fail, it's just maybe a step backwards. I heard
there's still plenty of time to bounce back.
Yeah, you still have plenty of time to bounce back, and then there's that kind of old saying that the failures they're really just educations, right? Let's call this all our undergrad. So take that first step. And with that, any final thoughts before I wrap us up here?
With this being the first podcast of our series, our experiment here, and the first of 2025 as well, my final thought is just, I look forward to the connections and the engagements, the discussions that'll happen out in the industry, but then in this podcast. I know that we're starting something new. We're experimenting a little bit with it, and I know we're going to have a ton of fun with it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the relationships with the wonderful people that we know in this industry help us to shape these conversations and become elements we bring back, integrate into it. And really looking forward to this year we have ahead and this fun we're going to have with this podcast too.
It should be a fun experience. Get it? The CUInsight Experience? And with that, that'll do it for this first episode of the 2025 season. I have to get used to saying that. This one's in the books. A few things before we go. As always, we will link to everything we talked about in the show notes. As I mentioned earlier, Jill's very active on LinkedIn and she lets me know what's going on. We would love to hear from you there. Share your thoughts, ask questions, give feedback, suggest future topics or guests. We'd love to hear from each and every one of you. Please take a minute and check out our sponsor, Trellance, in the show notes. Trellance is a leading technology partner for credit unions. They have been a great supporter of ours here at CUInsight and the podcast in general. Their support allows us to have this much fun doing what we do and bringing these great conversations to you. So please take a moment and give them some love. We greatly appreciate them, as we do you. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player, whether it's Apple or Spotify or whichever one you use. We are on them all. I'm going to put Jill on the spot here one more time. She always has a book going. As you know, if you want a book that's mentioned on the show, a quick Google of the CU. She's shaking her head at me. She doesn't have one for you this week, but we'll make sure she does for next week. You could always read the 4-Hour Work Week. I did mention that. And so
I'm still working on Radical Respect, which I mentioned last time I was on the show, but I know not every listener listens to every episode. So if they missed that one before, they
that is on the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. I think I also mentioned I listened to Matthew McConaughey's Greenlight book and took a bunch of nuggets out of that one that have been running through my head in my journaling the past month or so. So anyways, if you any of those books, we'll try to bring you some other recommendations in future episodes. Once again, you can just look up the CUInsight Experience podcast book list and you can get your next read from Amazon or on your Kindle as Jill does, or me with Audible. Last but certainly not least, we want to thank each and every one of you for listening. Y'all rock, and we appreciate every one of you. Can't wait to see you out there on the road in 2025. Be well, friends.
Thank you so much.